Welcome back to the virtual Woodhouse, and it is number 2 sessions today. And I must say, I'm a little bit fired up. We just had the most amazing session at the World Economic Forum on one of probably my favorite topic, which is about the ESG matrix for sustainable future. If you did not watch it, don't miss it. You can go in and see it on the World Economic Forum site. We had Julia Sweet, Chair and Chief Executive Officer as Accenture, a person that I can't even remember it soon. It was before COVID at World Economic Forum for 2 years ago, where we launched ESG Ambition together with the Secretary General, which is really a strong ESG framework. Then we had Brian, who's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Bank of America. We had Frans van Hout, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Royal Philips, and Aline Medjani, Chief Executive Officer of Magen at Future Holding. And amazing conversations. And some of my takeaways are being a front runner, passion about ESG Matrix, co-founder of the ESG Ambition with UN Global Compact, is that some of the core things that were said was that working with ESG Matrix is a key thing for running a business today. It is the core of your business model. It is when you work with sustainability, it's no more, and listen carefully, it's no more an obligation. It is literally just what we do. It's not about having a CSR department anymore or having a kind of charity arm in the company anymore. Doing good is what we do when we run our core business. That was what the conversation was all around. And then it was all around great examples about how we embedded it into our business model, into our business processes. And that is really why I built the ESG Ambition framework, because it's all about bringing it into the strategy, bringing it into the reporting, bringing it into the backbone of the company, how we run our processes. It's about how we work with our partners. It's really everything we do, we run a business. Very exciting moment working with ESG Matrix for Sustainable Future. So with me, I have some amazing people, and it is a long list of names because there are literally thought leaders out there in the world working with this topic today. So what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes is to talk about the ESG's reporting, ensures organizations consider the impact of sustainable issues, enable them to be transparent about risk, opportunities they face. So it's really around how we work with reporting, how we work with sustainability, the ESG framework, the different frameworks that exist today. So together with me, and it will be Christy, who will be the moderator from Leaders on Purpose, a good dear friend of me. She's the CEO and co-founder of Leaders on Purpose. We have Matthias Wikström, a CEO of Doconomy. We have Anders Rodenberg, CEO of the Nominator. We have Matthew Bell. He's from Ernst & Young, working with partners in climate change for sustainable services. We have Bobby, who is a faculty adjunct assistant professor in the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke University, who do some exciting stuff about educating the next generation, because that was another topic that was discussed today at the World Economic Forum. How do we make sure we have talent enough in the market? That was actually the closing word at the session we just heard at the World Economic Forum. Then we have Adriana, who is a young talent actually at Woods, came from Duke University, who is the thought leader, Enterprise Growth Accelerate lead at Woods. Then we have Robin Epstein, head of ESG at EMEA at GBRE Global Investment. Krista already introduced, and then we have Amani Lero, product manager at Manos. Oh my God, it's going to be excited. Krista, over to you, and I will stop sharing.
Oh, it's such an honor to be here and to be co-hosting this session with you, Anne. I'm really excited to be here. Your enthusiasm for this topic is so contagious, and it is, to your point, such a critical topic, right? What we measure matters, and there's been a lot of progress particularly since COP and the GFANs and sort of some standardization around this, but I think there's a lot to talk about, and what a great panel we have here. I've connected with each of you and learned a little bit about what you're doing. Such a diverse panel on this really important topic. So really delighted to be here. I think what we can do today, just to get us started, is if each of you would go around and introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your organization, the work that you do, and how this particular topic is relevant to you. And maybe we'll start, Anders, we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an important topic for sure. Yeah, I'm the CEO of Denominator, and we do data around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the S in ESG. And that's also why I'm very passionate about this specific topic. I work with data my whole life and reporting and filing standards, especially in the financial area, but been following sort of what's just happening within ESG. And I'm biased, but this is where for me it's more about the people that lives in the environment. But when you look at this from a metric reporting, all the work that is going on, IFRS, the ISSB, also the SASB, and all these different standards that are coming out, a lot of the focus, same with SFRD and on all the stuff in the Europe, the taxonomies and this is focused on the environmental piece, not as much on the social piece. But I think this is the key thing, at least what we do. It's about the social as well. And I think I can just, if I can share a little bit about the correlations between some of this, but I don't know if you can make me a presenter as well. But I think the core here is because if we focus just on the E and forget the people, so again, I'm originally from Denmark, live in New York now, but there was a recent case where one of the biggest supermarket chains in Denmark said, we will no longer sell fruit that has been flown in. At the same week, Finnish scientists had made coffee successfully in a lab. So this was both announced as an amazing sort of environmental news, which it is potentially. But I was thinking, what is the social downside of that? Because the fruit that is being flown in is the mangoes, the stuff from the developing countries where people have not really benefited from the 150 years of burning oil and gas. And it's also where the coffee is grown. So if we just invent solutions to the environment and implement them too quick and they're not inclusive, we take away their livelihood, and they're, people there are equally as bad off as otherwise. So this is why I really think that the S is as important, and it's even less we have less taxonomy there and standards. But yeah, I can maybe turn it on to someone else and talk more about it. I have some data I can show about the correlations between these things, but we can get to that later.
That's great. Thank you so much. And we couldn't agree with you more. This S is a critical piece. So it's nice to see some real progress happening and really important work that you're doing there. Maybe Amandine, let's move to you, and maybe you can share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Sure. Well, delighted to be with you all today. My name is Amandine Leroy. I'm the product manager of a small technological subsidiary of BNP Paribas. Our mission is to help institutional investors, such as insurance companies or asset managers, better work with the ESG providers of their choice. And we do so by helping them on the IT technological side to help them map their portfolios with the data providers, which is not an easy task. And I think I'm talking about ESG metrics is particularly important for the corporates who want to improve and to make a better world, but also at the upper layer to help the financial institutions drive the money they are managing towards better instruments. So that it really has two layers. First, the corporates who need to report on their activities, who need to motivate their employees and to change their activities, but also convince the investors that they are worth the money of those investors. So I think I can testify of the difficulty for those investors to know more about those the ESG scores of the corporates, and the difficulty to compare those activities and then to integrate that into a already quite difficult and complex decision process.
Thank you so much. And boy, you know, I think coming out of this last session, and didn't Julia Sweet said something like only 26% of the businesses that are actually report on all the 6 different areas. So I couldn't agree with you. What you're doing is so important, and there's a lot we can dive into on that as well. But we don't have enough time today. So I think from here, maybe Matt, let's move over to you.
Thanks, Krista, and thanks, Anne. Really appreciate the invite here today. So, Matt, I run the climate change and sustainability practice for EY. It seems like this has been an overnight success, 20 years in the making, in the context of incorporating ESG more holistically into, you know, at least mandatory disclosures. But I do worry that we're going to celebrate our successes a little bit too early. To be unfair to companies, I can tell you that the vast majority of even leading companies around the world still have very poor systems and processes in the context of, and as even the environmental disclosures, let alone the social. And many of those wouldn't withstand any kind of external scrutiny to the way and degree in which we see that, obviously, for financial information in a mandatory, regulated way in every large economic market in the world. So we've got a long road ahead of us, but you are right, Krista, we have seen such a significant uptick in progress in the last 18 months, whether, as Anders says, that's coming from standard setters, so IFRS, somewhat finally, you might say, stepping into the breach and coordinating and bringing together the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and the Integrated Reporting Council, and obviously now the Climate Disclosure Standards Board as well, to try and unify what is, a vast number of voluntary standards in this space that companies are working with at the moment. I would like to say, and one of the things that I've consistently said in the marketplace is we have to acknowledge and thank a number of those people who have established voluntary mechanisms, and of course all of those companies that have been the leading light in ESG disclosures. And I've got a sense, and keen to hear from people on the call today, that we are very much at the start of a long, God, I hate to use the word journey as a consultant, but there we go, journey, which is to say that today we're talking about disclosures which are historical, and things like the TCFD and TNFD and other aspects that are being discussed and now incorporated by companies are talking very much around how long-term value is being created by their business models, scenario plans for different outcomes over in sometimes multi-decadal time periods. And we're going to see, I think, a new foundational approach to how companies talk about their position in the world. So yeah, really looking forward to it, Krista, and thanks very much for having me.
Such great points you make, and we really feel, part of the work that we do is research on companies as well, and looking at this data, I feel you're exactly what you're saying there, and I do think that we have a road ahead, but at least we're starting to see some of the bumps and the big hurdles in terms of standardization kind of being worked out. But you bring a really good question. Do we see action coming from this? And so that's what we'll be excited to talk about. Matthias, maybe let's pass it over to you from here.
Thank you very much, Krista. And by listening to these guys, with Amandine and Matt and Anders, I would almost prefer to be in the audience, because there's so many good things to listen into. So Matthias Wikström, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Deconomy. I think our contribution to working with ESG metrics for a sustainable future is just that we have the data, we have the impact, we have the tech, but we don't have the interconnectivity, we don't have the links. We're still waiting to build bridges. And there's a few things there we need to do, and we need to educate the many. Our purpose is to provide digital tools to enable everyone to understand their impact, to engage around it, and also help reducing it. Working with UNFCCC for quite some time, we just integrated our methodology to make every transaction count within Mastercard's global transaction platform. They represent 3 billion credit card holders. So obviously our hope is that once you once you know and are aware, you can choose to do something or you can choose to do nothing, as Jean-Paul Sartre said. I think that the fact is that you will still be aware. And this is also about language. I think that we are now seeing, as we have had a cultural elite, we're now seeing a sustainability elite. I think that's risk. I would like to see the democratization of impact metrics. I want to see everyone understand and respect and commit to both the E and the S out of the ESG perspective, and of course with the governance to follow. And I think it's also interesting to see if we are approaching an inflection point in regard of the conscious consumer. Looking at recent research, one would be led to think so, but there is still a value action gap that I think we need to help each other bridge going forward. And that is what the economy is trying to do. Make every transaction count, make every product present its impact, both out of a financial perspective on your wallet, but also out of an environmental perspective in regard of carbon labeling and such going forward. So super happy to be here, and I feel like a kid in a candy store.
Yeah, such great points, and the work that you're doing in terms of like really looking. One of the things that really resonated about what you said, well, many things, first of all, but this idea of interconnectivity and the real importance of that. So we'll get this reporting, but how do we make sure that we have this connectivity so that one, somebody on one side of the world isn't undermining the best efforts of somebody on the other side? And I think that's a critical piece and a good, I think, maybe segue over to the work, Bobby, that you're doing there.
Hi, I'm Bobby Thompson. I'm an adjunct professor and graduate student teaching engineering at Duke University. My background is in as a designer and as a system leader and executive in the energy solution space, designing efficient solutions and steam and turbine controls or power plants. And I spent the last several years in academia, and my gracious colleagues at Wood are helping us put together some more real practical experience for students and how do you do energy transition and ultimately sustainability. It's very exciting because within the students, there is extreme positive motivation to make a change, but they don't, I'm teaching engineers, so they're very goal oriented. They don't know what the goal is. They want to shoot the soccer ball or the football, but they don't know where to shoot it. And that is part of what we're going to start doing, is giving them some real practical experiences, working with some industry projects for how initially it would be, how do you do some renewable energy transition? And ultimately it would be more including sustainability.
That is great. Thank you so much. And a really good way to pass this over to Adriana. Maybe you can share some of the work that you're doing at Wood and how it relates to this.
Yes, hi. I'm the Enterprise Growth Acceleration Lead at Wood, basically with a focus on the zero emission mobility practice, because one of the things that everybody knows is the transportation sector still contributes to at least 25% of all the global emissions. So transition to zero emissions vehicles is basically essential for our shared low carbon future. So when working in that, one of the things that I've always realized when we're talking about the race to net zero is the thing that is missing in the conversation is how can we ensure that the next generation of leaders can have the right skill sets to efficiently work and navigate into energy transition. So that's kind of like how I came up with the idea that in order to do this, companies that provide energy transition solutions need to assist schools and universities in developing a curriculum that will help them accelerate the skill sets that the future generation of leaders need. So that's why you have no idea how excited I am to be working with Bobby, because in here we're basically working with faculty, and as Bobby said, we're bringing real live projects or issues that we need the students to transition so that once they graduate, they can jump right ahead into energy transition. And then, help us build this new generation of leaders, have the right skill sets, and provide everything on energy transition that we need.
That's great, and such a win-win. These types of partnerships are just brilliant because you help the students also, these bright minds coming in and contributing to the work that you're doing, and everybody benefits, and it's so inspiring. Congratulations. Yeah. That's great.
No, because it all started when I started thinking, and in my conversations with Bobby and other faculty members, when I was like, okay, I want to hire somebody from Duke, because yes, I went to Duke, so Duke is in my heart. But then it's like, okay, what skill sets do we need so that they can actually come and start working in offshore wind, in zero emission mobility, in sustainable cities? So that's kind of like how this whole thing started. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited that we're actually having this education program that we're starting with Duke as a pilot. But of course, the idea would be to transfer this to all other universities. And of course, I will most likely be asking for support from my fellow panelists here. So, I mean, like Matthias, Anders, and Matt, and Robbie, and Amandine. I see you. You're going to be hearing from me in the future.
Oh, that's great. That is great. Thank you so much. And Robbie, let's turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Thanks, and thank you for the opportunity for being on the panel, and good to meet you all. So my name is Robbie Epstein. I'm the EMEA head of ESG at CBRE Investment Management. So we had a rebrand recently from Global Investors to Investment Management. In case anyone missed that, it was towards the end of last year. We're part of CBRE Group, so we've got a huge ambition to be sustainability leaders, and especially so at CBRE Investment Management, because we've got about 130 plus billion in assets under management, predominantly real assets in real estate, but also infrastructure and other kind of investment strategies. It's absolutely key. I mean, we all have seen the transition that ESG went through over the last couple of years. And I think the way I like to describe it is that we're kind of past the why now. I feel like the market gets why this is important, and we're firmly into the sort of the how. And that's the bit where ESG data really comes into it, because at the moment, it's one of the key things we need, both in terms of where do we need to focus our efforts? What do we need to reduce? Not just environment, also social, as everyone said, but also getting a good bearing on the governance elements as well. But one of the big challenges we have, and what is really a bit of a barrier, is that data point, because at the moment, A, it's getting access to it, good quality data, good coverage. But B, it's that piece around the guidance and the standards, all the stuff which we're talking about here today. And that's a barrier, particularly in the finance sector, because when you get those differences in standards, in assumptions, the underlying assumptions, particularly for greenhouse gas data, what scopes you're including, 1, 2, and 3, whose responsibility is it, who has to get that value chain data, and who reports that. That's a barrier, because when it comes to reporting that externally, if different financial organizations are reporting different things, it's not good. And I think that the problem there is that transparency. Until we get past that, we can't really start to take those big steps when it comes to impact. So a lot of great stuff is happening, but we've got to get past that sort of ESG day. So really positive, I think, around COP towards the end of last year, and since, to have seen the kind of consolidation of so many of those guidance frameworks. And I think that's a positive as we move forwards. Why is this important to CBRE Investment Management? Well, I joined, to my background, I'm a chemical process engineer, so I come from a background of data, particularly life cycle assessment type thinking across all kind of ESG criteria. I was a consultant for probably the last 12, 13 years, I think it is, advising on sustainability advisory. So helping many corporations across a whole range of sectors with this exact question. So I jumped in-house because I felt the built environment, real asset sector was a good place to get my hands dirty as we entered that critical decade for the planet. And I've jumped in really to help launch and integrate our sustainability vision, which we launched last year. And that's got two key pillars, which I think are relevant to this conversation. One is climate and one is people. And the reason for that is that in the built environment, around 40%, as I'm sure many of you know, of greenhouse gas emissions globally come from buildings, even more if you include infrastructure. So that's a material topic for us. And climate's a nice interconnected risk, which is a problem, but also an opportunity, I think, when it comes to ESG data. And then the other focus area for us is people, and that's because we've got millions of people that live in and work and use our assets every single day. So that social piece is really important. And I think one of the nice things that ended 2021 around COP26 was that conversation around the just transition, which is you can't just address all the environmental considerations without those social considerations. So to address that, we put in place a large and complex ESG program, and I'm hoping that I can pull on some of that to add some value to the panel discussion today.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that, and really gets to, you know, it's a good lead into this next question for each of you, which is really looking, you know, we've seen lots of progress, particularly coming out of COP, but looking into, you know, where we are right now. So, you know, really, and it's great because we have such a variety, each of you brings such a variety of experiences. So from that vantage, really, let's open this discussion by really looking at the reality of companies, particularly globally, as it pertains to ESG reporting, you know, the work that they're doing, you know, really, if you could bring some insight to that with an eye to the audience that's watching this, many people likely really looking to up their game in this area, because as Anne talked about, you know, this is no longer just a nice to have. This is just the baseline to get into business in general. So maybe let's see. I think Matt, you're advising companies every day on this, so you'd be a great one to kick us off in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I mean, you touched on this a little bit, which is this context of global. So clearly, if you're an organization operating within a single geographic center, you tend to align, I think, to what the expectations of the local market are for you, and then meet the stakeholder requirements and produce a bespoke report in that space. What we're starting to see, I think, in terms of the most significant developments are probably those companies who cross borders. So how do they start to think about multi-stakeholder issues, be that, Robbie, as you say, governance, which, you know, in many jurisdictions is a significant challenge, or just be that, you know, having to balance the materiality in the context of different sustainability challenges. So if you are in South Africa or if you are in Malaysia, you have to produce integrated reporting, you know, against the King 3 code or against the Malaysian stock exchange requirements. If you're in the UK, you're producing TCFD disclosures, and potentially from next year, 1,600 companies join that list. As I think Matthias mentioned, you know, during the COP, clearly a number of announcements, one of which was from our Treasury here in the UK, expecting companies to produce net zero trajectory reports, you know, the detail of which is yet to come. So we still have this environment at the moment where organizations are having to manage a number of stakeholder expectations in their disclosures. That's been really positive in creating an entrepreneurial spirit from companies to drive forward and demonstrate leadership around certain aspects. But the downside of that, of course, is that there's very little comparability between people's reporting, and it creates a real challenge in the context of the sorts of metrics and targets that you report on that genuinely demonstrate that you know your performance. So that's my first comment here is, we've got to get greater consistency in the context of disclosures, with a massive asterisk and a caveat. And here's my asterisk and caveat. In doing so, we cannot lose the overarching philosophy here, which is this isn't financial reporting. So this isn't the context of where the company is today and how it performed for the last 12 months. This is where that organization sits today, its impact on society and the environment, and this context of double materiality. And what we're seeing, again, from this global perspective right now, is that the SEC in the US is very much heading down the route to, I guess, move away from the context of double materiality. And so for those in the audience that don't know what that means, that is not just the impact that things occurring in the world have on your business. So climate change, how it impacts your business, human rights and modern slavery, how that impacts your business, but the impact that your business is having on those topics. And so this context of double materiality becomes more important. Unsurprisingly, potentially the European changes that we're seeing for the CSRD, the way in which the taxonomy is developed out of the Commission right now, is starting to take that principles-based approach and get organizations to report. But we're still very much in this balancing act. And by the way, I don't think we're fixing this overnight, Krista. I'd love to say we will, where organizations need to remain nimble, I think, and entrepreneurial still in how they disclose the most material ESG factors and how they're responding to them, whilst at the same time doing that in a way which isn't so narrative heavy that organizations or investors, I mean, Robbie, as he talked about, from an investor perspective, that they are able to be able to distinguish you from your peers? How do you distinguish CBRE from its competitors and demonstrate that its ESG management approach is going to mean that it proffers over time? So I might leave it there, Krista, for sake of not taking the whole time, but it's not without its challenges still.
Yeah, definitely. Great, excellent points. And I think Matthias, I'll pass this over to you. This is, it goes right into your work.
I think there is one word, well, many actually, but one word that resonates to the bone with me that Matt just mentioned, and that's comparability and the challenges around comparability. Because I firmly believe that we must make use of existing structures. You know, in our case, we try to make the efficiencies of the financial systems cater to the fragilities of the ecosystem by educating the many. Comparability is important in that sense that without comparability, there can't be competitive edge. And without a competitive edge, there won't be any winners. In all fairness, there won't be any losers either, except all of us, of course, given that this is not adjusted in time. But with winners, people will make money. And the basic rationale is really that if there is comparability, the world will be saved in no time because people will make money doing so. Without that comparability, without that very basic function going into all of the structures being set up now, and I'm quite positive around what we see with the PEF and the OEF coming out of the EU, with the taxonomy work being done there, and parts of the Green Deal as well, in regard of Frans Timmermans' work around citizen activation, I think is extremely important. But without these comparable data sets, there just isn't a roadmap. There is just no clock to use when competing. And we love to compete. Competition up until now has rendered great wealth and messed up a planet. Competition of tomorrow can render great value and save the planet. So I think that is the comparability word. When I hear that, it's like pressing a button, you know, and I get going, and I could be rambling on around that for quite some time, and Anne knows this very well from our conversations as well. But I think that pretty much sums up our perspective on it. And without the transparency-driven comparability, there won't be any demand. And if there is no demand, who would supply? So these are basic functions that we need to use to put into play to get this mess right. You know, it took all of us, which is a lie. It took some of us in the more developed world and out of an industrial perspective to mess things up. It's going to take all of us to get it right. And if all of us are going to get engaged, there needs to be a language for that. That language is data, and the data need to be comparable. So thank you, Matt, for getting me going. But that's our perspective at Economy.
Yeah, brilliantly stated. And I love the idea of using competition to drive positive change in this space, because I think you're exactly right. I'm just finishing Paul Pullman's book, and there's a lot of that in there. Amandine, let's turn this over to you. It feels like a good place for you to take us.
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Matt and Matthias said. Obviously, the corporates are experiencing difficulties to assess their impact on the world, and they're doing a lot of efforts to communicate on their progress. But again, at the upper level, at the financial level, and I think Robbie can agree with me. It's even worse, because when you're in financial institution investing in many assets, you're facing a variety of ways to retrieve and find the data. You can decide to look for the data yourself by having huge research teams. So that can be a relevant decision when you really want to be an expert in a very small universe of investment. But for the rest of the investment universe, you have to rely on agencies and people who will work for you. And what we see is that's really interesting, but also really confusing when you discover this market. All the agencies have different methodologies and different approaches. They're covering different geographical areas, and those are widely known pain points. But besides the traditional agencies using analysts to analyze all the official reports of a company. You also find new technological actors that are really challenging the market nowadays, trying to scrap everything they can on the web, on the social medias, or open source to gather extra information, which is really interesting to compare. And you also have a third type of, another type of actors emerging right now, which are the new types of, I call them the new generation of portals, helping the corporates report directly to the investors. And so when you're an institutional investor or just an investor at all, you have this choice between this variety of approaches, which are all of them are interesting and compatible. But then comes the problem of mixing all the sources of data, knowing what the quality of the data, choosing, and then trying to find out what is the good operational setup for your company, because all of this costs a lot of money. And since the regulation is not finished yet, and I don't think it will be finished at all, it's constantly evolving, but since there is still a lot of uncertainty on what types of disclosures the institutions have to make, then they need to stay flexible. And at Manos, we're desperately trying to help our clients to deal with all this complexity of who am I going to choose? I cannot rely on one single provider to I think Anders would be a great speaker on that, because on for example, the taxonomy or the SFDR PAI, our clients are looking for different types of agencies who can help them cover, and they're completely lost in this complexity. And then we're trying to help them map the data and deal with all the data mapping problems, and it's really important for the market to not have one single standard. I don't believe that we can ever agree on just one standard, but at least in standardize and to make the data comparable, that will ease the process, even though the rest of the rest of the operational chain will remain quite complex anyway.
Yeah, complexity is definitely, and a lot of confusion. I think we're definitely seeing, one of the things that came out of the earlier session was really just about, some of it is just get going, don't let the complexity kind of stop you from moving in this area. Anders, I will turn this over to you, because there's a lot of confusion about the environmental carbon impacts, carbon pricing, but particularly in the social space, how do you measure and what do you measure? Is it labor? Is it, is it diversity, and how, and even at the micro level in different countries, so maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, but I think that one of the key points you're mentioning, we need to just get going. And Matt, you also sort of mentioned, right, it is a journey and we're definitely not there and it won't be overnight. But with a little bit of positivity, thinking like, how long did it take the world on just financial disclosures? It took them 100 years and we're not even there. And especially working in with different countries around the world is still a big mess, especially even when you look at private companies and what they have to file on a financial aspect that is really needed. But Matthias, maybe to your point, I think the good thing is the transparency that we haven't always seen in the financial data. Everyone is demanding it for these type of metrics. So there is a massive push that we need the transparency. Then we need to agree on what are the standards in this, and that will take time. It will take less than 100 years. That's at least a positive. But in the meantime, yeah, we need to do as much as we can. And maybe, Robbie, that is where I think, you're probably one of those that will struggle the most to find the data sets and do the real apple to apple comparisons, but apples will always have different forms, even when it's apple to apple. And that's where we then start using a bit of proxies. We do as much as we can. That's, I guess, is all risk decisions, is taking a decision with as much information as we can. And then there is always risk, and it can lay in the data, it can lay in the actual performance. But I don't know, Anne, if you can share, because I thought it would just be fun with a very quick data outlook on the E and the S and the G, because this is, again, coming back to, it's so important we do this for the world and we get it right. And if Anne can't show it, it's also fine.
I will let you share as long as you give me my right back again. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah.
So because I did not get, so let me just find you here.
And Anders, whilst you're doing that, maybe I can make a comment, because I'm so keen to underline the point that you just made around, we have to move faster on ESG. It takes 8 years from the initial discussion around a new accounting standard to go from discussion to being implemented. 8 years. We do not have time in the context of planetary limits or societal structures to wait 8 years for perfection in the context of some of these disclosures. So I think you may be right, Anders. We can't let perfection be the enemy of the good here.
No, and again, the data is already telling stories, even if there will be some errors in it. The top here, and I won't use long because we are running out of time, but it's just that's the correlation between the E and the S, and this more specifically on diversity and inclusion. Again, are countries and companies actually doing well? When they're doing well on the environmental front, are they then also doing well on the social front? And as you can see, these lines don't correlate well. I won't go into all the details. The long story is there isn't a strong correlation. So just because if you're very good at the environmental piece, you might not be very well at the social. And we can also see that actually, and it's not to put them specifically on the spot, but some of the areas where we really need to see the energy transition. So the energy industry compared to the global performance on diversity and inclusion is some of the worst. So they're down on almost all the sub aspects, and there are more. But this means that we have the companies that are basically going to transition the energy and save us from the environmental point of view. But if they're have an even bigger catch up on the social piece, and same with the ocean and offshore wind and this, so that there are really many things here. But at least the good thing is that the data is already starting to tell us the pictures that we need to try and understand and come up with some solutions, even if we don't have the full comparability. And it's still better to compare oranges and clementines than it is to compare oranges and bananas, maybe. But at least I'm positive for the future. But
that's really helpful, and I'd love to dive into that. Will you leave a link or something where people can maybe access that? Yeah, that's fascinating. Adriana, I'll pass this over to you. In transportation, particularly, the data and really what's happening there. I think we're seeing some really good progress there, from my understanding.
Well, actually, we are, but the thing is that we're still on a race, because one thing is if you want to go and do your whole fleet electrification or conversion to hydrogen, but the other thing that we also need to assess is all the infrastructure changes that you need to have so that they can actually support your electrified fleet. One of the things that we also have here, and I think this is going to piggyback to the roadmap that was being discussed before. At Wood, we have a SCORE methodology that is basically a process that we follow with our customers, where we help them set their individual roadmaps to decarbonize. Because in here, what we do is that with this method, we do like a screening process that can be applied to a single asset or multiple assets, or to the client's full asset portfolio, or across a specific geography or region, using the evaluation assessment opportunities, where we see, okay, how can we substitute? It's substitution of fuels or feedstocks, for example, switching electricity production to renewable source, then capture, then we start thinking and talking about all the carbon capture technologies that we have, or emission control technologies to sustainably reduce or eliminate all of the harmful emissions to the atmosphere. Then we also have the offset, where we consider assets or product portfolios across a country or company-wide to scale, and then scale to decarbonization and clean air goals. We also do it in this methodology. We also go to the reduced portion, which is basically looking at that holistic asset optimization, considering areas around energy efficient, digitalization, and ops and maintenance best practice. And last but not least, we do the final evaluation, because whatever the decarbonization journey is for companies, for schools, for everybody, you need to apply a very structured evaluation process to be able to map it out, your decarbonization journey. I mean, because we all recognize we need to reduce our footprint, but without a plan and monitoring, it's just going to be wishful thinking.
That's really, really helpful. Okay, we have 1 minute left and we still have Robbie and Bobby. Maybe we can very quickly just have just a quick word from each of you, and then I'd love to just do a lightning round with everyone, just to each person just say one framework that you think is most promising, or one tool that you feel the audience, really would benefit from knowing about, that we maybe haven't discussed today. But first, Bobby, let's talk to you about building on, just briefly.
I think it's interesting because working for industry and working with students globally in finance and engineering, this comment about perfection is true because they're taught not to make mistakes. They're taught to do this. So when they get into industry and start doing solutions, I've sat in many meetings with program managers and project managers who just see that the engineer has to have things perfect before they release the product. So one of the things I found is trying to help teach students that there are some things you don't compromise, like safety. You never compromise safety. But something doesn't have to be perfect in order to be better and correct. So it's learning how to make that decision process when we look at renewable energy, sustainability, and metrics, and they're dealing with multiple global standards and trying to say, well, what is something that may get me 80% there? The 80-20 Pareto rule is a good thing, I think, to have practically students to learn coming into the industry.
Yeah, I think everybody can learn that. That's such a good point. And yeah, just keep going. There are some things, it's really critical thinking, right, at its core. Robbie, on to you.
I'm happy to throw my final thought into the same bit as well, just to use time effectively. So I think the key thing for me is that this is a huge opportunity. COP26 told us something is business needs to now lead, and they need to keep this moving, because COP is not rotating to countries that are going to be as ambitious as the UK in the short term. So business now has a real kind of responsibility to crack on. And I think the points that have been raised around don't wait till it's perfect, just get going. And I think the safety net and all of that is transparency, because if you're transparent about what you're doing, then you're able to have a discussion around it rather than just get attacked for maybe putting something out there that's misleading. So I think transparency allows people to kind of get moving with that. It is such an opportunity, because I think, to Matt's point from earlier, business transcends borders in a way politics can't. And that's a really important point. So a strategy in a business HQ'd in New York or London can literally have global benefits. So it's a really important thing that business cracks on with this and doesn't wait. In terms of guidance, couple of this, I mean, there's so much to cover here, but SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative, I think we finally have a global consensus on what net zero means, what should be in the scope and boundary, what is the fair point to jump off the Paris curve and start using those removal offsets, and that's starting to become sector specific. And that's really powerful stuff. It means that when we start talking about a net zero target and we start monitoring it, we can all check we're doing it in line with SBTI's net zero criteria. And that hopefully, again, will iteratively improve year on year. So I think all things in, it's positive, we're heading in the right direction. But I think the other key thing is that, that apples to apples point, it doesn't, when we add proxy data in, that's where it becomes problematic on comparability, particularly when you add the layers of assumptions that start converting into greenhouse gas emissions, tons of CO2e, that sort of stuff. But primary data should be comparable. So if we all focus on primary data, no matter where the guidance goes, no matter what assumptions get laid on top, we'll always have that primary data in the background, which we can unpack however we need to for whatever conversation we need to have. So I think my key thing is focus on primary data, and we can deal with the rest and the sort of bumps as things progress. But positive way to leave it, in my view. I think things are heading in the right direction.
That's great. Thank you so much, and excellent insights there. And do we have time for a quick lightning round?
Yeah, lightning round, and absolutely, yes.
Okay, do you want to start? Final thoughts or do you want to end? Let's have you end.
I want to end.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good. Anders, I'm going to toss it to you, and then you toss it to someone else. We'll just play hot potato here.
All right. I'm going to be very fast and say there's not one framework. It is really just get going, just be transparent, and then we figure out the frameworks and do it after that. So to get going, be transparent. Adriana?
Well, I'm going to say cross collaboration. reach out to people, reach out to industries, reach out to utility companies, reach out to everybody that you think that can have a say in your program for like fleet electrification or a sustainable infrastructure, but it's ultimately cross collaboration because we're all in this together. Bobby?
I'll just play on that. I said, appreciate the global diversity of backgrounds and perspectives because it may have result in some conflict, but that is typically where most of the innovation comes from, understanding the different perspectives and backgrounds and different constraints that everybody is bringing to the situation.
Who will you pass it to?
Amandine.
Well, I agree with Anders and all of you. I think several standards are bound to stay, but please with clear areas of compatibility. Matthias.
Oh, thank you. I would say comparable data and actionable insights. Stop the talking, start the walking, and avoid the claims, greenwashing. We've seen so many claims. Please stop claiming things, start doing it. That's what we need to see more of, I think. But I think everyone else said it the best already, so I was just scooping up kind of thing. And with that said, I think it might, is it Nick or Ans?
I think it's Matt.
It's Matt, sorry, Matt.
Yeah, no problem, Matthias. So I would just say, if you're a sustainability professional, go and talk to your finance colleagues. And if you're a finance professional, go and talk to your sustainability colleagues. We need our sustainability folks to be focused on long-term trends and innovation and being the real, the real creators of change in the business. And we need finance to help significantly support on data management and controls and stuff they're good at.
Love it.
Robbie, I think, right?
I mean, I think I've said it already, but maybe just to wrap up in things I have said, it's just, it's that get going piece. But I think it's don't be scared because we are all in this together. We will make mistakes along the way, and eventually we'll turn that blah, blah, blah into impact.
Love it. What a great panel. Thank you all so much for being here and for the really brilliant work that you're doing. It's been a real honor. Thank you, Anne, and the team at Wood for having this and bringing these conversations, really important work. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for a great panel. And as I said in the beginning, I mean, I live for frameworks and transformations. That's what I've done my entire life. And I just want to say, don't be too hard on ourselves, because there is a reason why we did not think about this earlier. I was at SAP before I came to Wood, 21 years, done global digital transformations all over the world. I can tell you one thing, and I'm not afraid of saying this, until recently, until I moved to New York for 6 years ago, I did not bring ESG or SDG into the core design principle of anything. I didn't. Because if you look at Six Sigma, Lean, all the frameworks have been used across all companies around the world to do the data transformation. Sustainability was not a thing in it. You could maybe find a small phrase. If you look at the Michael Hammer, which I'm a big fan of, maturity assessment, it is in the last sentence into maturity assessment. So that's why we haven't embedded it. Secondly, if we look to technology, being a big technology person, is that we are sitting in an opportunity now that we've never had before. You could do anything you want with technology. Now it's about what are we going to do around the technology. So when I launched the SDG Ambition, which is actually exactly 2 years ago, why it was great to see Julian from Essentia that I mentioned again, that I launched together with, and Antonio. We saw when we did a mapping up against the technology platform at that time for 2 years ago, that there was, I would say was, because a lot of happened in the last 2 years, there was a 75% technology gap. And you were not able to do the ESG reporting because that kind of data set was not collected in the system. So when I say don't be too hard on yourself, is that there has been a historical evolution happening, why it was not part of our core design principle. And that's why I just applaud big time this conversation, the earlier conversation today, that people are now realizing that working with ESG SDGs is the core design principles. And when it becomes the core design principles and anything you do, business model, business processes, reporting, it will become a natural part of how you run your business. And that is what 2022 is about. So thank you, everybody. I look so much forward to be part of creating this great program at Duke University. Everybody on the call here, you're going to be part of it, just, you know, right?
Yes.
Adriana, you bringing it in is what we're doing. So thank you so much. Thank you for the great stuff you do. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.